Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have the next session coming up. Now, just a few statistics for you on this one. According to the UN, 70% of the 1.3 billion people living in conditions of poverty are women. In urban areas, 40% of the poorest households are headed by women. Women predominate in the world's food production, 50 to 80%, but they own less than 10% of the land. The ILO estimates the value of unpaid care and domestic work to be as much as 9% of global GDP, and that is US dollars 11 trillion. To put that into perspective, that is twice to 3 times the global tech industry. Today, we delve deeper into understanding how geopolitical shifts and economic strategies intersect with gender dynamics, affecting the participation and representation of women in political, diplomatic, and economic spheres. Our esteemed speakers bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the conversation. So could I welcome onto the stage Anniken Huitfeldt, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kingdom of Norway. Big round of applause for her. And Ambassador Lata Reddy, former Deputy National Security Advisor of India and former Ambassador of India to Portugal and Thailand. I'm just going to give you a brief background of these amazing women. First of all, Anniken, she is a distinguished Norwegian politician, renowned for her exemplary leadership and dedication to business and trade with the current Labour Party. With a tenure as Norway's foreign minister and a background in history, geography, and political science, including degrees from prestigious institutions like the University of Oslo and the London School of Economics, her expertise in international affairs is widely recognized, and she is a complete advocate for gender equality and human rights on the global stage. Please give her a big round of applause. And we also have Ambassador Lata Reddy, as I said, former Deputy National Security Advisor of India and former Ambassador of India to Portugal and Thailand. She brings extensive diplomatic experience and strategic acumen to our discussion. She's had leadership roles with cybersecurity policy formulation and international cyber cooperation, and significantly influenced discussions globally on cyber governance and security. Recognized for her contribution to multilateral negotiations and foreign policy, her insights into the intersection of gender, geopolitics, and technology are invaluable. Together, both these ambassadors will guide us through an exploration of the multifaceted challenges and opportunities faced by women in politics, diplomacy, and economic sectors, from addressing underrepresentation in government and corporate boardrooms to examining the impact of conflict and reproductive rights on women's lives. Our conversation aims to foster a deeper understanding of the complex interplay between geopolitics, geoeconomics, and gender dynamics. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our esteemed speakers as we listen to them now. Thank you.
But Anniken, I was going to say, since I'm a kind of host, being from India, I would like you to kick off the discussion. Yeah. And, you know, we've talked a lot already between ourselves. So you can expect a very lively discussion. We've tried to cover a lot of topics in what we're trying to tell you about the role of women and why women are not as well represented as they should be in the field of geoeconomics, as indeed they are not in many fields. So, Anniken, why don't you kick off the discussion and share some of your thoughts, and then I'll share some of mine.
Thank you so much, Lata. And together, we have different experiences from different parts of the world.
Yes.
But we have very, very much in common, I would say. And I think we are both look forward to share that experience with the audience today. I come from Norway, a small country in the northern part of Europe. There is a lot of attention now I mean, you had this very good discussion on the regional development, but there is increasingly attention on what's happening in India, also in Oslo. When I was a foreign minister last summer, there's a political festival in Norway where all decision makers are taking place. And the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs last summer hosted an event on the relationship between India and Norway. And there were so many people from businesses represented there. I think, as your excellent foreign minister said in the opening, the focus on vulnerabilities and also the fact that we should diversify supply chains makes it even more interesting, I think, for Norwegian businesses to invest in the Indian market. And now I hope we can finalize a free trade agreement between Norway and India. We have complementary advantages, I would say. There is a lot of knowledge on technology, especially in energy, in Norway. And in India, you have so many skilled people. But the topic today is to talk about gender equality. And I would like to start by saying that Norwegian people and Scandinavian people in general, we are not by nature more gender-oriented or gender equality-oriented than others. It's rather the opposite, actually. In the 60s, we have a lower proportion of women in work in Norway than in other European countries. So this was a purely, I would say, political decision we took from a pragmatic point of view, because we know that if people are, or women are giving access to the labor market, that would be beneficial for the economic growth. So therefore, we have a more family-friendly work life, I would say. So both genders can take part in the labor force. I very often meet leaders, and they can tell me proudly that I am very gender sensitive. I treat women and men in my workplace equally. Then I will tell, wait, don't applaud me, because that's wrong. Because I think women and men, we are different. This is a very special date for me, 29th of February, because it was 16 years ago. I got the position in the Norwegian government as a cabinet minister, responsible for gender equality and children.
Oh, wow.
That was 16 years ago, or 4, as you say it. And then I had 3 kids. They were 3, 4, and 6 years old. So you can imagine, it was difficult. And you have to take that into consideration. Because if you are treating men and women equally in their 30s, there will be no gender equality. The burden of giving birth is so important for the society. So we should give women in their 40s and 50s better opportunities so we can reach gender equality. Because we are different, and this is a burden we cannot share. And I actually also believe that we need to encourage women more than men, so they take positions. And I will tell you more about that later on.
Okay. Well, if I can start off, I just want to set the context for our discussions a little bit. What is geo-economics? We're talking about geo-economics. What is it? To me, it's the use of economic tools to advance geopolitical objectives. Equally, you can use geopolitical strengths of a country to create economic results. So overall, I see it as an interplay of international economics, geopolitics, and strategies for each country to follow. So I just wanted to set that in context. And then I want to talk about women. And what I want to do, Anneke, if you agree, is let's talk about women in different categories. which all of which in one way or the other impinge on the question of geoeconomics. One is women in politics and government. You know, how do we influence these decisions which have long lasting, long reaching geopolitical and geoeconomic consequences? The second is women in diplomacy. You know, judging by my own experience, I think we have a unique role to play, particularly since economic diplomacy has become increasingly more important than political diplomacy in many, many areas. Thirdly, I want to talk about women in the economic sectors, especially in corporate sectors, because you know and I know the problems that women are facing in finance, in economy, in boardrooms, the huge untapped potential arising from women. And finally, something that may not seem to be evidently connected, but is connected, which is women as victims of domestic violence. Women where rape is used as a weapon against women, where cultural clashes between what is perceived as traditional behavior and modern behavior can impinge on the rights of women to become legitimate members of the workforce and to move around freely, to engage with society in a free and open manner. And finally, I want to talk about the reproductive rights of women, which is also very important. Because as long as you have uh, issues debated so hotly, such as birth control, the right of a woman over her own body and reproductive system, this question of sex selection, amniocentesis, the female infanticide problem, women who see being seen as burdens, you will not see women as economic opportunities. You will not see women in that light. So if I can I kick off on the question of women in politics and government, which of course you're much better qualified to talk about than I am, having been a cabinet minister. But I see a problem because, you know, in our parliament, as we all know here in this room, those of us from India, we've been debating for years over the question of having 1/3 of women. It should be 50%, but 1/3 of women being, of the seats in parliament being reserved for women has become such a big issue. And no government till date, no matter of any political persuasion, has been able to successfully steer this to a conclusion. You know, and I think you were mentioning to me that there is a quota. Am I right in the Norwegian government, or is it
In the political parties.
in the political parties? But exactly, because this is my point. You know that. Uh, for instance, I was in South Africa during the elections. What did the ANC do to prove its point that they did stand for gender equality? If they had 400 candidates for the 400 MP seats, they said every second candidate would be a woman in terms of one man, one woman, one man, one woman, right down the list. So of any number of candidates that they finally got, 50% of those candidates selected, because they would go in the order that the list was done, would be women. So the ANC ended up with 50% women, and by sheer example, the other parties were forced to include more women on their roles as well, because otherwise the women's vote would not have gone to any other party. So these are the innovative techniques that political parties can use to make changes happen in the way of thinking about putting forward women candidates. I think also what I love to call and then we're talking about women in government as well, so senior bureaucrats. And, you know, the question of domestic help which you raised, you know, the question of family support, the question of infrastructures to help women during childbearing and child rearing years. is such a huge issue. And the issues may be different in India and countries like Norway, because in India, fortunately or unfortunately, the availability of some paid domestic help to look after this burden, plus the question of very valuable family support is there, and but at the same time, it doesn't really address the issue, because until businesses and others become more sensitive, including governments, including institutions such as parliament, how are you going to have a place where women feel comfortable going into senior political positions or senior bureaucratic positions if there's no infrastructure to help them look after their children? Should there be creches even in parliament? Should there be creches even in senior government offices? These are very real issues for most women, and I think we have to recognize that. So, if I could just mention that, and finally, just one little point on what I call pink collar ghettos. The idea that women are okay in a slightly subservient position, like executive will be a man, the secretary will be a woman, the doctor will be a man, the nurse will be a woman. So it's what I call the pink collar ghetto syndrome. That women are very good as members of the workforce, but only at that level. So with that, I'll stop on women in politics and government if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, thank you. I very often hear that people are optimistic for the future when it comes to women's representation in business and in public life in general, because they can see very many talented young women. But I'll tell you, if we are willing to introduce some measures, there will be no reason for being optimistic. Because I've seen for very many years in Norway and also in other countries, the same number of women represented in law schools, in business schools, and also in universities. And they even have good grades. So why are they not entering the leading positions? And I also see that in politics. In Norway, we have a quite good representation of women and men at the top level, but not on local level. Among mayors in Norway, we only have 20%. So I've been working for my party in order to increase the number of local council leaders and also female mayors. And what I saw on local level was new women entered politics, but when they really became skilled, they were replaced with yet another new talent. So my experience is that in order to give women power, you must help them when they are ready to take positions. Otherwise, they will be replaced by men who very often renew the team around them, rather than giving women access to power positions. So my task then was to give women support so they could enter leadership positions. And I think that equality has to start at the very top. You cannot wait for the future. We must start at the top in politics, in businesses, and I believe in some kind of quotas should be introduced gradually. I'm not a revolutionary, so I believe in step-by-steps. So we do have that in certain political parties in Norway, and then the other parties needed to compete. So they also raised the number of women. But we are better on the top level in Norwegian politics than on local level. And we are also better in politics than in businesses. So I believe that we have to work really systematic in order to increase the number of women I believe in some kind of quotas. You have to find out here in India what you think will work best. Otherwise, there will be no reason for optimism in the future.
Thank you. If I can move on to something which I just want to touch on very briefly, because it's more to do with my own experience, which is women in diplomacy, you know. And while I've been very fortunate in the Indian Foreign Service, we've had 3 women foreign secretaries. Also, we've had women occupying very important ambassadorial positions in China, in very major countries. So the glass ceilings have been broken to a large extent in India. I know it's not the case everywhere in the world, and I would like to see more countries follow suit, of course. But even in the Indian Foreign Service, I have to point out that women had a very difficult time in the beginning, because Ms. Mutamma, who was the first woman to join the Indian Foreign Service through a competitive exam, she told me some really hair-raising stories of what she was subjected to as a young diplomat. No ambassador would accept her as an officer. He said, "What will I do with a woman officer?" She also told me that she was asked by an undersecretary in the ministry, "Why do you need an official hostess? You're a woman. You should be able to host your own party." And, you know, this was really, really insufferable behavior. So it is not that women did not have their issues. Initially, women had to resign if they married. They were not allowed to marry and remain in the service. That rule was changed. And by the time I came along, most of the battles had been fought and won, you know. But the issue is that these battles had to be fought and they had to be won. So I think now the government has really liberalized to the point where, you know, now 30 to 40% of our intake of women is diplomats. I mean, our diplomats are women. And whereas in my time, it was perhaps about 10%, which was unusual, or even then. But though the numbers may have gone up, the issues remain the same. So I just thought I should just mention that in passing. And I don't know if there's anything you'd like to share on this question of women in diplomacy. Do you think we bring special skills to the area? Do you think we have any particular predilection for diplomacy?
Well, I don't think women are more peaceful than men. I think that's a huge misunderstanding.
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned that I have 3 children. They are not 3, 4, and 6 years any longer, but 2 of them are sons, 19 and 23 years old. And if there was a war in Norway, they would have been sent to the front. And when I talk to other mothers in war zones, they are not more peaceful. Very many of them want a revenge or a victory. And if you have lost your loved ones, you might be more eager to confrontation, so the loss of their lives was not in vain. I'm telling you this because I think it's so important to bring women to the table as a part of a peace deal. Because if these problems are not dealt with, we will not deal with the root causes of a conflict. So we are doing mediation in several countries in Norway. We have done Middle East, didn't succeed. We've done Sri Lanka, we didn't succeed. We had more success in countries like Nepal, the Philippines, and especially in Colombia. And when we bring parties to the table, we never put pressure on anybody, because Norway is a small country, so we can't use any military or economic power at all. We can only facilitate talks if we are asked to do so. But on one area, we put pressure on the parties. And this is that you have to bring women to the table. And this is a pragmatic approach, because we know that peace lasts longer if women are brought in. And even more, I would say, in gender-divided societies. Like in Afghanistan, for instance, where men and women are living different lives. So their experiences must, or women's experiences must be brought to the table. The suffering of mothers who have lost their sons must be brought to the table. So that's why we need female mediators. I very often hear that, in very, very gender-divided societies, women will not be allowed to enter. My experience is the opposite. If I visit a very, very gender-divided society, I will get access to power structures. But I'll also get access to areas where male politicians never, ever can enter, right? To the female areas or sphere. So I believe that women can be very good mediators. So I think it's wrong when people tell me that let's achieve peace first and then we can address women's rights afterwards. I think it's the opposite. It must be included in every peace process.
Thank you so much. I think that's very, very interesting. I would completely agree, that you need to bring women into discussions about peace and security, unlike what many people believe. Now we come to the real issue, which is women in the economic sectors, So what do I mean? I mean finance, I mean economy, I mean banking, I mean boardrooms, the corporates, I mean the huge untapped potential of women joining the labor force, women becoming entrepreneurs, and the general economic benefits for society if you have this untapped resource utilized properly. So, and I particularly am saddened by the behavior of corporates in India, and I presume in other countries as well. They act as if having one woman director on the board is a big deal, And my point is, until you have 50% of your independent directors and your investment directors being women, what are you talking about? There is no equality in the corporate sector.
But you have experience from diplomacy and also business.
I do.
How can you compare that in India?
I would say
describe the differences.
I'd describe a difference. Like, for instance, even when I'm on the company board, the board of directors of a company, I find that very often my voice, which would perhaps talk more about the social benefits or the need to be seen as a compassionate employer and so on, is sometimes drowned out by the voice of those who want to look at it purely as a matter of profit and economics. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because after all, the ethos of a company is also very important. The message you want to convey. I started off initially on being on a microfinance company board. And when we wanted to scale up and we wanted it to become one of the largest microfinance companies in India, which it did eventually achieve as the goal up to a point, the attitude was, you're not being businesslike about it, And my point was, then why did you get into microfinance at all if it wasn't to help the weaker sections of society? For instance, it was 90% of the people who were taking these microloans were women and who were benefiting hugely from them, who were really putting them to good use, educating their families, running their households on the earnings they were getting from these microloans. So that was one aspect, the the aspect of the ethos of the company. Then later on, the same company became a bank. And when they became a bank, it got even worse because, again, they moved away very much from the idea of the ethos of the company. And while they had some tokenism in terms of small loans, they really became focused on the profit motive. And finally, of course, I stepped down from that board, not because of any other reason, but because we have a rule in India that nobody can serve on the board of a bank after the age of 70, and I attained that age. But it was a very amicable parting of the ways. But my experience in boardrooms has also been somewhat mixed, I would say, as it was perhaps in diplomacy, where one faced a certain subtle kind of discrimination. So I think the questions are complex, and I think they spill over into many areas. But again, to get back to the question of the women in the economic sectors, what do you think we should be doing to encourage more women to take up corporate executive positions and to address this question that why are women not rising to the top? Why are they not the CEOs in the numbers they deserve to be?
We're not rising to the top because there is a huge difference between women with and women without children.
Yeah.
It's basically more difficult. And if you have to make a choice between taking care of your children and achieving top position in businesses, well, it's a very simple choice for most women. So I think you have to take that into consideration and be willing to provide a more family-friendly work life. Otherwise, you'll never achieve gender equality in business. Because we see so many women who have the right university education. And if we don't accept that they want to stay more home with their kids than men, well, will not achieve gender equality. I've told you about the family policy in Norway. You cannot copy that because India is very different. But what we tried to do during the last years, step by step, of course, because I'm not a revolutionary. I believe in small steps. The first thing we did was to give in the parental leave 4 weeks for the father. So he could stay home with his newborn kid. After, 9 months for the mother. So this was a start. And then we increased his quota. So I would say, as a cabinet minister, if I was chairing a meeting and at 4 o'clock, a man could raise his hand and say, Madam Minister, I have to leave now to pick up my kid in the kindergarten. That would never ever happen in Norway 30 years ago, but this is more common now. So I also believe in the involvement of men more in family life, step by step, so men and women can have equal opportunities.
Yeah, I think that is very important. And I see that now with the younger generation increasingly, that men are really willing to put their family obligations first. Paternity leave, even in India, as you know, we now have the opportunity, particularly in government, to take paternity leave, in addition to a fairly generous maternity leave allocation.
And I'll just mention that our Prime Minister, in his office, he got a very young man. He was very eager to demonstrate how skilled he was. And then he got a daughter. And he's told the Prime Minister that, no, I'm so dedicated that I want to work. I will not take the father's quota. then the Prime Minister said, you are not allowed to skip the father's quota. You're not working in my office while skipping the father's quota. So I think that's extremely important that the leadership are willing to focus on this.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, basically, if we don't really provide a conducive ecosystem for women to work in all these areas, whether it be business or diplomacy or the corporate sector, the financial sector, you have to build the ecosystem where women are comfortable, women feel valued, women essentially feel that their problems are understood. I mean, I may be single, I may not have children, but I should be compassionate towards women who do have this constraint, right? So I think that until we get that same understanding and compassion from men as well as women in leadership positions, you're not really going to achieve true change. If I can move on to another area, I want to talk about this very uncomfortable question, of women as victims of domestic violence, where rape has also been used as a weapon, particularly in war situations, and what this arises out of, this feeling that it is all right to brutalize another human being, and why violence is used to control women, to show them their proper place, so to speak. And I want to talk a little bit about the situation in India, if I may, Anneke, that, in India, I think part of the problem is we're a country in great transition. We have people who come from extremely traditional backgrounds, moving from rural situations into urban situations, and where they receive perhaps very mixed messages from the milieu they have grown up in as opposed to the milieu that they are operating in now. They see young women who are dressed in a way that they consider provocative. They don't really know how to react to them. They don't understand the politics of equality in the workplace to a large extent. So I don't entirely blame them because they are a product of their upbringing or of their social conditioning, if you like. So it becomes very difficult for them not to objectify the woman or to use violence as a way of controlling the woman, And we've had, of course, some very, very gory and very highly publicized and very emotional encounters of this kind taking place. And you've all read about them, you know about them, there's nothing to hide whereas this is concerned. But the question is, how do we address this? And particularly I'm worried about when it's used in war times, in times where women become refugees, and they have certain special needs because of the children also that they have to try to protect and keep with them at these times, So how do you actually overcome this system so that women become valued members of society who can actually add economic value to our societies, and how do you address this question of violence,
I think dealing with the question of violence needs openness because it's so shameful. When I travel in refugee camp or talk to women in refugee camps, I always ask them, do you face or experience more domestic violence now than before? And it's much more domestic violence in a situation in a war zone and so, because men are getting so frustrated. And we also have to deal with the causes, I think, to give men the ability to talk about what they are struggling with, because this is also part of the problem. That men who are suffering, there are more domestic violence in such areas. And I also know that it's even more shameful, maybe, at the top of the society among educated women. But it's still very common. So I think we have to deal with this with openness, willingness to admit what's happening, but it also happens in Norway. So it's not like this happens among poor people. It happens in all social classes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this problem is there. And that brings me really to one of the last topics I wanted to discuss. But of course, we can talk about this forever because there's so many issues related to geoeconomics and women, which is the reproductive rights of women. And many of you may be wondering why I've chosen to introduce this. And I think the reason is because the question is, do women have control over their own bodies? Can they make a decision independently to have birth control, for instance, or to have an abortion? These are thorny issues. These are very difficult issues for most people to talk about. And we all know the debate in the US, the furor there's been about this whole question of whether the woman has the rights over her own body or not. And and in India, of course, which I feel very strongly about, this whole idea of sex selection, the amniocentesis tests, and female infanticide. The idea that a woman is somehow less valuable than a man. And this gets so indoctrinated into the girls that women are seen as burdens whether because of dowry practices or anything else. I think unless these women are respected, these malpractices will continue. How do we overcome this question? How do we make sure that women have control of their own reproductive rights?
We can recognize pushbacks on this area in several parts of the world. I think this is linked to the economic setbacks. If a leader cannot deliver economic growth, he will focus on other areas, and very many of those leaders are focusing on women's rights and women's rights to reproductive health. So it's getting increasingly more controversial in very many countries, also in Europe. So we were talking about geo-economic, the economy in the world today, and I think that we have to promote more trade, just to link this to the agenda we started with, because I believe that we need more international trade, we need more international cooperation, and by introducing this setbacks on women's rights, it's a way of getting around the real problem in the society, because we know that a woman's right to decide over her own body is extremely important for her quality of life and her ability to take part in the labor force.
So coming back to this question of the geoeconomics, if you like, and how all these issues get interconnected in a way, I want to come back to the question of how can we make sure that more women, essentially are involved in financial sectors. How do we make sure that they get to play more of a decision-making ability, decision-making role in the boardrooms. Do you have any specific recommendations on that?
I don't have recommendations because
Yeah.
I think you should find your own way. But we have introduced quotas in Norway
Yeah.
on listed companies. We did that 20 years ago. Now also in bigger companies in Norway, we have quotas. So women get access to the boardroom. Because as I said, even though women were educated, they didn't get positions. So that's not my recommendation, but this is how we've done it in Norway. But you're doing well also in India. You have very many skilled women. So I think from a purely commercial perspective, give those educated women access to leading positions in the boardrooms will be beneficial for you economically. So we need to focus on the pragmatic approach, I think.
And also, don't you think, and that in a way, Anakin, because, for instance, women are not usually made the chairman of the audit committee, very often. I wouldn't say in all companies. In some companies, they are. In fact, in one of the companies which I'm in now on the board as a telecom company, it's a woman who heads the audit committee, but that's the exception rather than the rule. Because I found in my boardroom experiences that they're more likely to say, "Oh, you do CSR, do the corporate social responsibility part, or you do the human resource development committee, or you do the stakeholders relationship committee meeting." And the tougher ones, the audit, the risk analysis ones, generally are given to the men because there's a perception that men will be tougher on these issues and therefore more effective, and women would be better dealing with these issues. Don't you think that kind of stereotyping is also one of the issues that women have to battle with in the boardroom?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
And the fact that you will always select those who remind you of yourself 30 years younger. But I also think that women can be like that.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I do think so. But, I really want to say that in all these issues that we've discussed, whether it's women in politics and government, women in diplomacy, women in the economic sectors, especially the corporate sector, and the question of women as victims of violence and the reproductive rights of women, there's one underlying theme, that all these issues are interconnected. For women to truly blossom, to truly achieve their full potential, unless each of these issues is addressed, you're not going to be able to achieve the whole, And,
Yeah.
well, again, to quote our friend from Nepal, the foreign secretary from Nepal, the sum, is really always greater than the parts. So I think, unless we put all the pieces of this puzzle together, we're not going to be able to achieve this, the goal we're looking at, which is for women to play a critical role in geo-economics. And only when gender ceases to be an issue, when we stop saying, "Oh, this is the best woman for the job," or, we just say gender is now irrelevant. The question is, who's the best person to deal with this subject? Can we really achieve true equality in geo-economic terms or in any other terms? That's really what I wanted to say in conclusion. And I'd love to hear your closing thoughts, and after which I thought perhaps it would be interesting to open it up to 2 or 3 questions from the audience.
Just want to pick up on what your eminent foreign minister said in the beginning about the increased tension in the world, and that Norway and India, we share the same view, that we should talk to everybody in a conflict. As a foreign minister, I invited Taliban to Norway. That was extremely controversial because people thought that because of how women are being treated in Afghanistan, we should deny talking to them. I think that's totally counterproductive. I haven't seen any example in the world that people are being more friendly towards women when we are denying to talk to people. So that's why I'm very concerned when I see in very many conflicts in the world today that there is almost a competition on which part you are not willing to talk to others. We can see that in the situation in the Middle East right now. Some people say that we cannot talk to the Israelis. Others says that we cannot fund Palestinian refugees. There's a competition of boycotting dialogue, which I think is a totally failure. So therefore, I'm a strong believer in diplomacy. I think that will help women in vulnerable situations. So we share the same views, Norway and India, when it comes to diplomacy and the necessity of this in a world with increased conflicts and more wars than before. I've seen figures, because we have been following this over years, that last year, war-related deaths was very high, higher than the last 30 years. Last time it was that number, it was in the genocide in Rwanda, so that was 30 years ago. So in this situation, where we see more conflicts, more wars, we should be more willing to talk to all parties.
I completely agree with you, because I think dialogue, even with adversaries, can only help. You know, I think there are a lot of people who may not agree with this statement, but I personally believe that if we don't keep the channels of dialogue open, then we have no chance at all of achieving a lasting peace. So I understand we have about 10 minutes left. So I think there was a request whether we could take a few questions. We'd be happy to answer the questions. Any questions, anyone? And will there be a traveling mic? Perhaps, yes.
That was a wonderful session. Thank you very much, Madam Aniket and Ambassador Lata. Thoroughly enjoyed, and it was a thought-provoking session. My question is, we are talking about and we are experiencing inequality in various walks of life. Is the problem of inequality in the mind of the man or in the mind of the woman, from your experience?
What would you say, Anike?
Both.
Yeah, yeah.
And I strongly believe that we have to work with men, not against men. And I strongly believe that the more gender equality in a society also will benefit men. I was talking about domestic violence. We have to also deal with the root causes of this, and that also will benefit men. So I think that power sharing and let women get access to the labor force will also give us the opportunity to share the economic burden in a family. And I also think that giving men better or more responsibility in family life will raise their quality of life, because some men are working too much. So I think it's both mindsets, in both mindsets.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
I tend to agree with Aniken because in my experience as well, change has to come from both men and women. Women have to change their mindsets, maybe set their goals higher, maybe demand more of the workplace. But at the same time, I think men have to be receptive to these ideas, and men have to also agree to accept that a more equitable ecosystem has to be evolved if women are to take their rightful place in geo-economics and in the corporate sector. So I would say it's both ways. And finally, I think a lot of people would say that it's society that sets these standards. My question is, what is society? Society is us. It's made up of men and women. So unless we ourselves make up our minds that we are going to change, that we are going to change our ways of thinking, it will never change. So I would say everyone should think very seriously about this question of gender, and whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, and try to see in what small ways we can bring about change, and in large ways as well. Both are important. Yes, we have a question there.
Yeah, I thank both the persons on the dais for a wonderful conversation. So, Madam Minister, I have a question for you. In the Western world, that includes Japan, women outnumber men often by 2 or 3 or 5% more, whereas in developing countries, and I'm referring to India and China, which make up 40% of humanity, the men outnumber women.
Outnumber women.
Women are more in the Western countries, and men are more in the developing countries, especially India and China. In fact, Amartya Sen, a Nobel Prize winning economist, wrote a famous article in 1990 where he said that 100 million women are missing. 100 million women are missing, and he was referring to India and China. So, since you, Madam Minister, you said you had the privilege of talking to so many different parts of the world, including places where men can't go but women can. Do you think this is a difference which is significant? Do you think this is a very stark difference between the gender ratios? In fact, in some parts of India, the sex ratio is as low as 84% or 85. So for every 85 women for every 100 men. So is this something you think which is a significant factor, and does it affect geo-economics?
You are the expert on this.
Well, I agree with you, and I think this has a bearing on what I mentioned about the reproductive rights and the preference for a male child, and I think that has been a problem both in India as well as in China. In China, because of the single child policy, which they had for many years, people preferred to have a male child, to carry on the family name, the heritage, whatever. In fact, Gautam could probably shed some light on that because he was posted in China, and he knows the social system there. But the princelings, as they were called, the single male children were preferred over women and women children or girl children. And the same was true in India, and that's why I referred to the whole question of amniocentesis and the sex selection ratio, as well as practices such as female infanticide, because women were seen as, or girl children were seen as burdens. So, I think these are related in a way, and that's why you get this disproportion in China and India as compared to Western countries.
Why is the East-West divide on this?
Why? Well, I guess because women were perhaps not not valued as much in India and China in that sense. I mean, the birth of a great girl child was not regarded. I mean, people do say things like Lakshmi Ai hai and things, which means the goddess of wealth and prosperity has come to our house. But I'm not so sure that that is really put into practice in traditional societies such as India and China. It may be so among the more enlightened sections of society, but not otherwise. And in the West, I think those battles were fought and won already, perhaps. That's the reason. What do you think, Aniket?
Well, I think it has to do with how we value women and men in the society in general.
Yeah.
And to get rid of this problem, you have to deal with the causes of it. To value girl babies, give them the same value as boys. And I'm not an expert on this, but I think this will also create an economic burden in the future if you're not willing to deal with this. So we see that in China now, that before you could only have one child. Now you get economic benefits if you get 3 kids. Then you get a lot of benefits. So it's the opposite, that you actually need more children and you also need baby girls. So it will be an economic burden in the future if we are not willing to deal with this.
Any other questions? We have a question there, lady there.
Thank you for an interesting conversation. My question is related to geoeconomics, since that has been the focus of this particular session. When we are talking about geoeconomics,
Can you talk into the mic,
yes,
please?
am I audible to you now?
Yes.
Thank you. So when we are looking at geoeconomics, I think trade becomes the core focus. And in today's day and time, we are also looking majorly into value chains, which is what we are trying to impenetrate as countries that are calling ourselves to be the next in line for a global superpower. So from that perspective, what role do you think public policy has to play to bring women into that value chain integration, which then lends into the labor policies that were being discussed? I would appreciate your observations on that. Thank you.
Would you? Okay, we've got one more there and that'll be the last, but can we finish this question or shall we take both together?
Take both together.
Okay, we'll take both together. Go ahead.
Good evening. I think in this Asia Economic Dialogue, South Asia is a great example where we have had 4 prime ministers of India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and even Pakistan as women prime ministers who have been leading geoeconomics, geopolitics. So I think there is a tremendous amount of gender equality that goes on in this particular part, and I think it's a shining example for the world. Thank you.
Just to answer this question, while I agree with you that there have been honorable exceptions to the rule in terms of having these outstanding leaders who are women, at the same time, I think we must recognize that they are exceptions rather than the rule, because unfortunately, it's not all women who rise to the top, and it's not as easy as that. To go back to the other question, your specific question was on how it works into labor practices, and public policy and labor practices, am I right? One second, please use the mic. Yeah?
Yeah, so the focus was on value chains.
Yeah.
And then how do you integrate women through your labor policies into the value chain?
Into the value
so that
chains.
It translates into geoeconomic advantages.
Okay. Would you like to take that, Annika?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Do we have another hour? So we can.
No, I don't think so. Maybe another minute.
Yeah, I think it has to do with education, that you give both men and women access to education. Even though we have a high proportion of women in universities here and also in Europe, I think you are actually doing better when it comes to female representation in natural science. You are doing better there than very many European countries, actually. And that will give women a unique position in the discussion that we are having on value chains. Because I know, see in very many European countries, that we have this discussion about vulnerabilities, and we need to diversify our value chains. And then I think that women in India can play a very important role in that respect.
I think with that we've completely run out of time. So while we would love to continue discussing with all of you, I think we must allow the evening to proceed as planned. So thank you very much for your patient hearing to both of us. And I hope you all enjoyed the discussion as much as we did.
Thank you so much. May I invite Dr. Kelker onto the stage to give a token of appreciation? And perhaps we can give the first token of appreciation to Anniken Huitfeldt as our guest, former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. And to Ambassador Lata Reddy, former Deputy National Security Advisor of India. Big round of applause. And let's get a photo as well. Thank you so much to both of you. So, lots to think about, lots to take away. Thank you both for a fascinating conversation. So we've now got to the end of day one, and conversations will continue to flow and new connections will be made. Thank you very much for being part of the Asian Economic Dialogue. This is Vandana Saxena Poria signing out for today. Thank you.